It's an end of an era. Dr. Manmohan Singh, former Prime Minister, is no more, and the Modi government has called for an extended number of days of mourning. And this tribute is apt. In a sense, we are all of us Indians, connected to former Prime Minister Dr. Manmohan Singh. This is because his touch, his vision, changed our reality, our everyday existence. He helped many of us enter the middle class, gave us the freedom to question our government, and most importantly, dream about living, learning, and earning anywhere we wanted in the world. That's because, as the chief architect of India's economic liberalization during his tenure as finance minister in the early 1990s, he took India to the world. Later, beyond our lives, as Prime Minister, Dr. Singh had the opportunity to shape the country in his own vision. Unfortunately, and one needs to talk about this also, viewers. Unfortunately, the Congress system and the exigencies of coalition politics meant that he wasn't allowed to grow into the job, into his prime ministership fully. This meant that unlike his tenure as FM between 1991 and 1996, his tenure in office as Prime Minister in 2014, which ended in 2014, was to end in myriad questions being asked of him on many fronts. This led him to hope that history would judge him kindly. And the question then that arises today, on this sad day, is whether it has indeed, or whether it will judge him kindly. Let's speak to some distinguished colleagues, protégés, and even critics of Dr. Singh to get an answer and examine Dr. Singh's mixed legacy. Though a legacy, viewers, that in the first iteration as finance minister has infinitively changed, as I began by saying, our reality. And I want to first begin with Mr. Montek Singh Ahluwalia, who was the former deputy chairman of the Planning Commission and key member of Manmohan Singh's team that brought in liberalization. We will also speak with N.K. Singh, former chairman of the 15th Finance Commission, who actually, in a sense, was part of the earlier administration and then came in for just a month or so before Dr. Manmohan Singh decided that he wanted some of his own team when he became the Prime Minister. We also have Salman Khurshid, who was a colleague of Dr. Manmohan Singh in the 1991 Narasimha Rao cabinet, and also was External Affairs Minister, viewers, in the UPA years. So also had a ringside view to a large number of very important and very transformational events, like the signing of the nuclear deal. And he, of course, also can give us a bit of an idea of the larger Congress ecosystem and all the intrigues that were the hallmark really of those 10 years, viewers. We also have Milind Deora, one of the youngest cabinet ministers, but someone who came away feeling that Dr. Manmohan Singh didn't treat him in that sense. He always treated him as an equal. There was no patronizing attitude from Dr. Singh. In fact, there was an attempt for the longest possible time to groom young talent under him. And that, of course, is a very professorial quality. Urijit Patel, the ex-governor of the RBI, another individual who would have tried to implement some of those path-breaking reforms that the FM in Dr. Manmohan Singh catalyzed in 1991. And Jay Panda, who was in the opposition through a large number of those years, but was not part of the BJP, but the third party ecosystem looking in. So we have a 360-degree view. We'll also have Dr. Ranganathan with us to give us the citizen's view and perhaps also a view on whether the Congress ecosystem really, at some levels, have lived up to the legacy of Dr. Manmohan Singh. So let me first begin with Montek Singh Ahluwalia. Thank you very much, Mr. Ahluwalia, and condolences go out to you. You've, of course, had a personal rapport, a personal connect, so to speak, with Dr. Manmohan Singh. Tell us a little bit about the professor, the person, and the proficient economist behind the Prime Minister that we in latter days got to know.
Well, you know, he was not someone who, as it were, lent himself to your having many personal recollections, because you're a quiet, inward-looking person as a personality. But he was really very warm when he found that he was in an environment that he was comfortable with, and certainly I found, as a much younger person, he was very inspirational. I mean, part of the inspirational, of course, is the professional eminence and so on. But, you know, he carried all that professional eminence very lightly. He was a very decent human being, and you could not fail but be impressed by that. And I think he took a lot of interest in other people. I mean, he didn't direct people, he didn't present himself as a leader, but I think he took a lot of interest and would ask questions which made you realize that there's a lot deeper in whatever you're thinking about or struggling with. And I think that was pretty unique in him. You know, I think when somebody is not very outgoing and you get to know them personally, you sense a little more these values. But I think most people who had anything to do with him were very impressed by his simplicity, simple living, sort of usual high thinking, simple living. And, you know, I think when you think about it, his liberalization led to a tremendous burst of consumption amongst younger people who found themselves able to afford things which maybe their parents weren't able to afford. And yet his own lifestyle was not at all consumer-oriented. I mean, in some ways, I think he carried greater credibility, advocating greater liberalism and greater freedom of choice, because he was not himself sort of, if you like, benefiting from this freedom of choice, etc. And I think that's important.
Well, talk us through the template, really, Dr. Manmohan Singh's template for reforming the economy and, of course, transforming the way we do business, the way we approach economics. How relevant is it today, Mr. Singh?
Well, look, I think it's clearly, I mean, the world has changed quite a bit. So one of the important things, and he was very, very conscious of this, one of the important things is that you don't just do what worked 30 years ago, may not be the most important thing to do right now. And I mean, as an economy develops, new challenges emerge. So, but I think he was more than anyone else aware that there are new challenges emerging and we should begin to focus on them. I mean, for example, in 1991, the biggest problem was massive policy distortion in product markets. I mean, we're not allowing foreign investment to come in, not allowing companies to expand, restricting imports, that kind of thing. So a lot of that was changed, okay? But I mean, over time, you begin to realize that if you really want to move up the next level, then certain other issues become very important. I mean, one of them clearly is the quality of human capital. In 1991, we had the human capital needed to push ahead. But as we've grown, if we want to move further, we need much bigger improvements in human capital. So that's a new challenge that has to be taken up. Equally, I mean, climate change is a new challenge. It just wasn't on the agenda in 1991. But I'm pretty sure that Dr. Manmohan Singh, if he was with us today, well, I know that even about a week ago, when I last met him 10 days ago, he was very much aware of how the world is changing, and very much aware that we need to redefine what is important in the light of the fact that the world is changing. Now, exactly what he would recommend, of course, is for us to guess. But I think he was not a person who thought that policies had to be sort of immobilized and cast in stone. They have to change all the time, but they have to change in a way in which you recognize that policy making is very complex, the economy is very complex, and actually economy is getting more complex. Plus today, the world is becoming more complex. I mean, remember in 1991, it was a very simple unipolar kind of world. I mean, the United States was the only game in town. And except for the Soviet Union, which more or less collapsed in 1991, everybody was following the globalized economy. That has changed. And I mean, that doesn't mean we should reverse ourselves.
That's true.
But we need to think, what does the change mean for the policies that we now want to follow?
Well,
and that requires fresh thinking.
And that thinking must be done, of course, by his political legatees. Perhaps in the Congress, have they done justice to Manmohanomics as we know it, sir?
Well, he himself said history will be kinder to me than at one point when everybody was focusing on whatever little problems there were. And I think that's already true. I mean, if you look at the newspapers today, the summary view of Dr. Manmohan Singh's contributions are very clearly laid out. So I think his legacy is pretty safe right now, if you ask me.
Okay, well, condolences once again to you, Montek Singh Ahluwalia. Tomorrow, of course, the final rites of the former Prime Minister, and may his soul rest in peace. Thank you very much for joining us with your insight. Let's turn to N.K. Singh. He needs no introduction, viewers. Somebody who's still active, really, and still a pillar of not just insight, but also a very important experience for current administrations. And we've seen him, of course, lend his very, 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 in fact, considered opinions to the discourse even now. So, N.K. Singh, thank you very much for joining me on this solemn occasion. Now, you're somebody who's, of course, known Dr. Singh, colleagues also, but for decades altogether. What are your impressions of the person? And that's a question that I will be asking others too. But what were your impressions of the person behind the Prime Minister, the professor, and so on and so forth?
So let me put it this way to you. The one dominant feature about Dr. Manmohan Singh was his generosity, his compassion, a sense of confidence which could inspire in you, as also a sense of forgiveness. He was unswavering in his image and the vision, but he would tolerate faults, forgive aberrations, as he always looked to the big picture. Above all, he inspired trust, not only of those who worked with him, but in a much wider circle, as being a man to whom his integrity mattered more than anything else. His simplicity and abstemiousness was almost disarming. I have, Rahul, a rather hilarious incident once which I might mention to you. All of a sudden, when he was a finance minister, I entered his room and he was sitting in a corner working on a speech of his. The table lamp was somewhat dim. As I entered the room, he said, yes, and then he asked me, can I ask you a question? Sir, please. Is my room the shabbiest room of the finance minister in Asia? So Gavin Rafferty has written in a piece. So I said, I don't know what you say, sir, but would you want me to do something to do. No, 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 please do not. I just made that remark. I think we need to do much better on economic growth before I deserve a better room. He had that great sense of compelling abstemiousness and simplicity, which was really truly disarming.
Now, someone once said that he preferred ghee over caviar. What aspects of Manmohanomics are still shaping India today when we're talking about and reflecting on his legacy?
So let me tell you something about which has always troubled me. Let me tell you that when the far-reaching economic reforms of 1991 were undertaken, they were undertaken in the background of how to overcome the immediate problem, namely the balance of payments difficulty, and to prevent India from sliding into becoming a debt defaulter. That was the primary challenge at that time.
True.
And what did we do? We entered into an agreement with the International Monetary Fund for an upper credit tranche agreement of $1.1 billion after we had fully exhausted the other modalities of the fund, and also a structural adjustment loan with the World Bank because there was a double conditionality. At that time, when we had concluded this, the negotiating team got a feeling that this was enough to tide over the difficulty. But many had cautioned me. Dr. Manmohan Singh was acutely aware of the fact that the leadership which he gave to this negotiating team had perhaps secured what it wanted without giving too much. We had secured that victory. He realized that this could be a Pyrrhic victory because we had an opportunity. We did not complete the 1991 economic reforms to a question which has repeatedly been asked: what did we miss out in 1991? We miss out, for instance, Rahul, in undertaking any significant steps to alter the factors of production, a challenge which continues to elude us till this date. Those who were involved and have been involved subsequently in multiple ways ask the question, why have these changes eluded us for so long? And that's what I wanted to suggest to you, that the fullest agenda of the 1991 economic reforms were neither implemented nor were undertaken because it got away with parting and giving up very little under the crisis and the leadership which he had provided. These, of course, were continued at the time of Prime Minister Vajpayee, when he undertook some very difficult decisions on, first of all, on the nuclear issue, which would significantly put India on the high table in the area of telecommunication, highways, the enactment of the Fiscal Responsibility Management Act, which awaited till 2003, Dr. Manmohan Singh's period. We could not do that. So that had improved the overall economic strength, on the back of which Dr. Manmohan Singh then showed remarkable audacity as a Prime Minister in undertaking that nuclear deal. He staked the future of his government, but he realized that if India was to become a competitive investment destination, we could not leave out the United States as an important player. We needed to demonstrate confidence, trust in being able to welcome private capital as well. He took these decisions. Alas, as I look back, he staked everything to secure this nuclear deal. But till today,
we haven't.
Given the infirmities in the subsequent insurance and other changes which were necessary, the fullest outcome of this is far from optimal. So there was a lot which was achieved in 1991. There was a lot of economic reforms of that 5-year period. There was a lot which was achieved during his 10-year period of the Prime Minister, even though that in the first period, given the crisis, given the leadership of Prime Minister Narasimha Rao, perhaps his vision remained as high and daunting, but it needed much greater consensus and much greater conviction of the organization and the party to be able to undertake many unfinished reform agenda during his period of 10 years as Prime Minister.
So Mr. N.K. Singh, this is a very important point to make. Why haven't we finished the agenda of liberalization that was unfurled in 1991?
Let me put it this way to you. We have made significant progress. On the labor code, we have made very, very significant progress. The labor codes, the states are in the advanced stage of just notifying the rules. On the land, factors of land, we have certainly been able to make movements in some states, and we hope that other states would replicate the examples, for instance, of Gujarat and Maharashtra in having much simpler land laws. By the way, these debilitating land laws which exist all came in at the time of Dr. Manmohan Singh when he became the Prime Minister. Otherwise, the land laws are much simpler. But these draconian land laws was something which was brought in by the new Land Acquisition Act, which was brought in during his period. And it is therefore taking much greater time to be able to persuade and to be able to build a consensus in the states to carry forward this reform agenda. On the issues of financial intermediation, I mentioned land, labor, capital.
Yeah.
I've dealt with labor. I've dealt with land. On capital, much greater capital efficiency has been achieved, even though I agree that a consensus needs to be built in bringing in new players in the financial sector.
Yes.
Of course, the competitive efficiency of the Indian banking system, its ability to leverage, its prudential standards, bringing down the non-performing assets to a historic low, had very important achievements, including the achievement of being able to use enhanced digital technology to spread the banking revolution to rural India and to those who had been left out of the formal system.
Now, I can't help but ask you this question, Mr. N.K. Singh. Does Namonomics differ in its approach from Manmohanomics? And if so, how, sir?
Well, look, that's asking a question, does growth matter? It will matter to everyone. It mattered to him. It certainly matters to the current Prime Minister. It certainly matters to the current Prime Minister that we have to grow fast enough for India to become a developed economy. This was not a quest or a vision that was articulated in any earlier period. The quest of India becoming a developed economy by the time we become 100 years of our independence is a quest emanating from Namonomics. It was not a quest which existed at the time of Manmohanomics, because at that time rates of growth, which may have gone up, were growing up in a certain way. We now need to catapult those rates of growth, and we will use three important factors. Use technology, harnessing the stack of technology which we have, and improving the cost and quality of governance. This is making a significant difference on total factor productivity, and to enable what may be called jumping the typology of growth, not making incremental changes but transformative changes by harnessing the power of technology more meaningfully to transform health, education, and above all agriculture. There are new challenges which have come up which did not exist at that time. Let me give you an example. The challenge, for instance, of an orderly change to an era of renewable fuels, financing climate transition to an era of more sustainable climate matrix is a new challenge which requires new approaches which are being integrated in part of the Namonomics and part of the quest to make India a developed economy by 2047.
N.K. Singh, thank you very much for speaking to me. And of course, you wrote a brilliant article this morning reflecting on your views on Dr. Manmohan Singh. And you've said so much today that goes beyond some of the platitudinous lines that have been put out on our grid and not doing justice to all that you've actually said today. Some very important points made by N.K. Singh. And I just hope that our grid will update those points to give the significant news points there. But thank you very much for joining us. Now let me speak to somebody who actually worked as a colleague with Dr. Singh in the cabinet from 1991 all the way up to 2014 in both iterations, in the P.V. Narasimha Rao government as well as in the 2004 to 2014 UPA government. Salman Khurshid, thank you very much for speaking to me, and again, commiserations to you and condolences. You were a colleague of Dr. Manmohan Singh in that very crucial Rao cabinet, that crucial time, that crucial era, the era of liberalization. Was there consensus brought on by perhaps exigency, or were they just doubters even then?
I think that this was out of the box thinking, and his presence, Dr. Manmohan Singh's presence, both first as a finance minister and then as a prime minister, was a very inspirational presence, and he had the backing. He had the backing of everyone. In fact, the whole idea of reform was an inspirational idea that everybody backed. Of course, there were doubters. There's no reason to believe that there weren't doubters in the country, and that would be reflected in the government as well. But an overwhelming support for this idea of restructuring and reform of the economy and opening up to market forces, but balanced by very clear safety net that was provided for people who would be impacted and affected, and that then was developed into a full-fledged social welfare economy, which provided for remarkable things that included Manrega, that included the right to education, that included the right to housing, the right to food. All the social sector matters all came as part of that, if you like, a package deal of reform and restructuring, opening up of the marketplace, and protecting people as far as their social requirements were concerned.
Let me ask you a question, because this is an important one. I'll go down the years to the UPA era. Mr. Khurshid, you were External Affairs Minister under Dr. Manmohan Singh. Few acknowledge, but by then he had also acquired the art of realpolitik, so to speak. He rebuffed the left, salvaged government to steer the landmark Indo-US nuclear deal. You had a ringside view. Tell us about that moment and the fact that he was ready to stake it all, actually, for that deal.
Well, this sort of plugs in with your first question, because our foreign policy, as you know, had been moored in largely with the Soviet Union. Part of the alignment deal was that we would not be in any group of countries, that we would not be connected with any group of countries as allies, but we had working partnerships, and those working partnerships including the Soviet Union, which was a major source of supply to us, and indeed was also a major market for us. And we did it all without the need for dollars. It was all done on rupee basis, trading with the Soviet Union. Now, for that reason, obviously there had to be a gap between us and the United States of America. The United States of America, on the other hand, was a necessary partner if we wanted to move into the modern world with modern nuclear technology. they were much ahead of the USSR, and they could give us much more than the USSR or Russia could have given. And therefore, we needed to break through with them. But unfortunately, the past held us back and past held them back. And then, of course, we had this serious issue of the United States being inclined towards Pakistan. And therefore, there was no real purpose of trying to deal with the United States, etc. This is the logjam that Dr. Manmohan Singh broke. And he did something which was completely and totally out of the box by ensuring that we could have a negotiated settlement for opening up what was called really apartheid barriers for us as far as nuclear policy was concerned. The nuclear apartheid policy was reversed by his being able to make a breakthrough with the United States of America with the nuclear deal. And thence onwards, the impact that had on commerce and the impact it had on trade was obviously really remarkable.
Well, thank you very much for giving us that perspective, Mr. Khurshid. I want to now introduce our guests to Milind Deora. Milind Deora, you're very interesting in the sense that you were part of the cabinet back then in the UPA era, and now you've, of course, switched allegiances, so to speak, political allegiances. Now you're in the NDA, you're part of the Shiv Sena. And perhaps I would like to take this conversation forward with you to the current era. Have we done justice to Dr. Manmohan Singh's legacy by following the tenets of Manmohanomics? Do they apply now? Have things changed so much that perhaps they don't? We heard N.K. Singh, we also heard Montek Singh, Ahluwalia. They were all talking about how perhaps a lot of those elements didn't even get implemented because of the lack of consensus even today. The political economy of that time, which sort of dissuaded, dramatic reforms, continues today. So I just wanted to ask you this question. It's a question that I think viewers will also want to hear, coming from somebody who sort of transcends regimes in some senses.
I can say one thing, and I've heard many conversations between Dr. Manmohan Singh and my late father well before the UPA was formed. During the UPA era, Dr. Manmohan Singh certainly was a reformer in the classical sense. When I say a reformer in the classical sense, he genuinely believed that government should be smaller, should be more efficient. I wouldn't go so far as to call him a neoliberal economist, like a Milton Friedman, for instance, but he certainly believed in privatization of loss-making public sector undertakings. He certainly believed that India's private sector, most certainly during the UPA era, that it had reached a stage where it could compete internationally, and that the private sector should be unleashed. And by in order to do that and to achieve that objective, the share of the public sector in business should reduce substantially. So he was a classical reformer, but look, there's politics also. Every politician has to keep politics in mind as well. In the first UPA, there were about 65 MPs from the left parties supporting the government. And I remember when the airport modernization plan took off, where to start with the Mumbai and Delhi airports, they were not privatized, but there was a public-private partnership. You brought in a private operator essentially, and the government still continues to own those airports, or did continue to own those airports for some time. At that point, it became a huge controversy that there's privatization, there's public-private partnerships. But I think he managed to get things done despite the political limitations that he faced.
Right.
And he did that based on his personality, his ability to bring people across the aisle together.
No, so speaking from the other side now, looking back at the Congress and its ecosystem and, of course, the UPA, what's the difference, if at all, between what we are seeing today, the approach to the economy today, the policies today, and Manmohanomics?
I don't think so. I think that there are a lot of similarities, in fact, between Prime Minister Modi and Prime Minister Dr. Singh in terms of their economic vision for the country. I don't think there's much of a difference. I think there's a difference, unfortunately, between Dr. Singh's economic vision and the current Congress party's economic vision for the country.
Okay.
That's a separate issue. That's more of a political issue. But I don't see any difference. I think there's continuity, in fact. In fact, I would go back as to say that from the era of Prime Minister Narasimha Rao, a few prime ministers in between, we had many prime ministers in between Prime Minister Narasimha Rao and Prime Minister Vajpayee, who may have had a different economic view. But then I think Vajpayee ji continued that agenda. Dr. Manmohan Singh had a similar economic vision. Prime Minister Narendra Modi ji has a similar economic vision, which is essentially to unleash India's private sector, allow us to compete globally, strengthen the public sector wherever it can be strengthened, and truly enable the common person, whether it's with the use of technology, whether it's to disintermediate government. And Aadhaar is a good example of that. Aadhaar is a project which, or GST also, which was conceived and implemented by different governments from different political ideologies, but with the aim of making India more competitive, and B, disintermediating government where it's inefficient, to ensure that public services reach the common citizen without any corruption. So I think there's a lot of similarity, but sadly my erstwhile party has, I think, drifted away from the idea of.
No, so let me just press you on that. Are you saying that the Congress needs to do more to honor Manmohanomics and Manmohan Singh's legacy?
Well, again, that's for the Congress to decide what they want to do or don't want to do and where the country is headed. In my opinion, the country is aspirational. Whether you live in a village, you live in a city, people want India to move forward. People are aware of what's happening around the world. People are aware of India's private sector, public sector efficiencies and inefficiencies in both. And I think that the public of India will reward parties and leaders who undertake economic reforms that empower them. There are many examples of that. The insurance bill, for instance.
Yeah.
When the insurance bill, my father was chairman of the finance committee when Yashwant Sinha was finance minister. And they worked together across parties to pass the insurance bill. And at that time, the unions of LIC and GIC were saying that these companies will die. But in fact, LIC and GIC's business has grown substantially over the last 20 years of bringing in the insurance bill. Of course, their market share has reduced because they were a monopoly. They're 100% market share, but their market share has reduced, but their business has grown.
Yeah.
In fact, there are more employees that they've hired. So I believe, and who has benefited the most, more than LIC and GIC, ultimately you and I, the consumer, the Indian citizen has benefited.
Yeah, I started by saying that.
I think economic reforms are here to stay. Whether the Congress chooses to honor him or not, that's a different issue. But I do believe that in the year 2016, which completed 25 years of India's economic reforms, I believe the Congress party at that time should have honored Dr. Manmohan Singh's legacy while he was alive.
Wow.
In 2021, when the country, and not just the Congress party, when the country was celebrating 30 years of economic reforms. Dr. Manmohan Singh was alive 3 years ago. The Congress party should have celebrated it. It's a great legacy, in my opinion. There are many reasons why I know they didn't, but that's a different issue, and I wouldn't like to get into it today.
No, understandable. But I think that conversation needs to be had. So we are going to now go across to Jay Panda, Dr. Ranganathan, and of course Urijit Patel, who will talk a little bit about the economic angle and the perspective and how that thread was continued into the NDA years under Mr. Modi. So let's open that conversation up now, and let me bring in Mr. Jay Panda and Dr. Ranganathan. Urijit Patel stays with us. So let's go straight across to Mr. Panda. Mr. Panda, thank you for joining us this evening. You're, of course, now very much with the BJP. You were with the BJD earlier. So you were again in the third party space, looking sort of outside in, so to speak. Now you're in a sense an adversary of the Congress system, etc. But you are a intellectual and therefore have extreme sense of equity when it comes to making these observations. So I'm going to ask you, many people have views and labels for Dr. Singh, especially when he became Prime Minister. Some people even called him the accidental Prime Minister, the reluctant, there are several of those words. How do you view his times as Prime Minister, where he had a very complicated relationship with power, didn't he? Here was a professor, And then he was sort of brought in, he's an economist by training, not somebody who was very alive to the art of realpolitik, as they say, but then he becomes the head of a disparate alliance and all the intrigues that go with coalition politics. That is a complicated relationship, Jay Panda.
Well, first of all, Dr. Singh was, long before he became a finance minister or prime minister, was one of the foremost public intellectuals and in positions where he helped to shape policy in the World Bank, then in the Reserve Bank of India. And he had made a name for himself which went beyond Indian shores. He was respected around the globe. And so when India had that crisis in the early 90s where our gold had to be mortgaged, he was seen as a breath of fresh air coming in as finance minister. And of course, the liberalization which started under him was legendary. And I think the greatest contribution he made to India was during that phase. Later, of course, it was in very different circumstances in which he became prime minister, and that had a different legacy for India. But he remained respected throughout. He was always soft-spoken. He was a gentle soul. He had a personal touch about him. I have many experiences to which I can attest.
Okay, let me bring in Dr. Ranganathan on this point. Dr. Ranganathan, thank you very much for joining us this evening. Obviously a solemn occasion, but I want to ask you this because, we can't not look at Dr. Manmohan Singh as some people say the reluctant or the accidental or even the silent prime minister. So, and I know that you lend yourself to sometimes looking at things not always from the prism of political correctness like I do, and I do get into trouble. So I need to ask you this because, in the interests of history, one must sort of be balanced when we look back. And I have to ask you, did Dr. Manmohan Singh, why do you think he felt the need to make that lament that I just hope that history will be kinder to me? Why do you think he would have said something like that? He never wrote really a memoir, so we really don't know.
No, good evening, Rahul, and thank you for having me on this very illustrious panel. And my sincere condolences to the bereaved. It's a terrible loss for the country, no doubt about it. As you know, that rogue Churchill said history would be kind to me because I would write much of it myself. Manmohan Singh ji said no such thing, but I would say in hindsight, he was a very remarkable man, and I'll tell you why, because last 24 hours I've been reflecting on this. Many people say, as is our culture as well, that, do not speak ill of the dead, or at least let some time pass and then be more objective than you usually are. In Dr. Manmohan Singh's case, I have no qualms in being critical. And I'll tell you why. Because he's a remarkable man, because there are so many things that I can be complimentary of him. That kind of, would shroud or would kind of cushion the effect that any criticism I may have of him may have. So, it kind of, in many ways, the good deeds that he did cushion for me, my criticism of him. So if I may, I'd like to, dwell a little bit on both. Yeah, I mean, I see him as pure gold, glittering, shimmering, but at the same time, malleable, soft, and, prone to be ductile. And both served him well. As an academic, absolutely brilliant, a wrangler, which is a double first from Cambridge, a rarest of the rare, top-notch scholar, economist. India needed him. The nation is grateful because he pulled us out. Some may say the reforms were forced by other hands, visible or invisible. Be that as it may, he was on the ground. He pulled us out of the black hole and he dragged us out into the right direction. Whatever we are right now, all our health indices, everything else is because of those economic reforms. So the nation is grateful. The nation would always be grateful. That's my compliments of him, and that's in no small measure. I think if whatever he achieved there, if a man had achieved that much, man would be content, right? I would like to remember him as that, a top-notch economist, a great finance minister. Now, let's come to the other part where quite rightly he was accidental or reluctant. He did a lot of things that, I would find that a leader should not do. Obviously, he himself invented the phrase coalition dharma, and under the garb of coalition dharma, he looked the other way when corruption happened unabated. He let others rule the country, quote unquote, in many ways, literally so. PMO became somebody else's territory. In the wake of 26/11, when our air chief wanted to bomb terror hideouts in Pakistan, he did not give permission. We know what happened in Sharm el Sheikh. Of course, there was a silver lining in the nuclear deal where he stood his ground, which was great. But at the same time, when we talk of honesty, personally, I would say he was as honest as our current Prime Minister. That is, there is no lanchan, if I may use that Hindi word, taint on him personally. But both of them have looked the other way as corruption has gone on in their parties and around them. So, is that corruption? I would say possibly yes, in cash or kind, whatever you may call it. In terms of morality, people say yes, he was very upright. But then I ask, who was the chief economic advisor of the dictator Indira Gandhi during emergency, when millions were being persecuted, when laws were being thrown about, when Supreme Court was under the foot? It was Manmohan Singh. So yes, it is a troubled legacy, but at the same time, I would want to remember him as a great scholar, a great academic who saved India.
Okay, let me bring in Jay Panda and also talk a little bit about how all of this was implemented all through the ages with Urijit Patel, who's been patient. Let me first come across to you, Mr. Jay Panda. Now, this is a straight question. Did the 10 Janpath ecosystem prevent Dr. Singh from growing into the job, so to speak? There was this, NAC, parallel government, whatever. There was always this feeling that someone else held the remote.
Well, look, let's be very clear. He was not a politician that came from the grassroots. He was not a frontline politician in that sense. And so, the mandate that he had was, as a Prime Minister, was indirectly from his party and from his coalition and other political leaders who had been at the forefront of campaigning. So the kind of mandate that he had, I think, you couldn't compare that with others who have held the position of Prime Minister. Now, as Finance Minister, he had a different kind of mandate, where Prime Minister Narasimha Rao took care of fielding the political aspects of the responsibilities, and right. Dr. Singh focused on doing what he did best, which was to bring about very dramatic policy changes. Now, as Prime Minister, of course, he was caught in a situation where, apart from his own party, the coalition dynamics of that era was such that anybody was going to be buffeted around a lot. And you could see that in the day-to-day functioning. We saw that in Parliament. You saw many aspects of a technocrat trying to handle things in a technocratic manner, whereas the political reality was something that required a very different kind of handling. Now, throughout all of that, as I said, he remained respected. Now, I remember when the civil nuclear deal with the United States was in the offing, it was a very sensitive matter, both in India as well as in the US. But he took care to articulate his thoughts, his ideas, and his dreams. And even though I was a relatively junior member of Parliament, that was about 20 years ago, he took the time to reach out to people like us and explain the rationale for what he was doing. He always came across as sincere.
Sincere. And he probably also got the hang of trying to sort of work the system and build these bridges across political chasms. So let me bring in Mr. Patel. We heard N.K. Singh, and he made, and of course we read his piece this morning also, and he said that Dr. Manmohan Singh was conscious, and I quote him, of the limits of India's political economy of change, unquote. He was aware that a government first needed to survive to reform. Those limits applied. Even when, as Prime Minister, the compulsive reformer in him seemed shackled due to the transactionalism of coalition politics. Would you agree, Mr. Patel?
Well, I think that what happens is that every generation of reforms becomes more difficult, not easier. And we have had 30 years over this, and what we undertook in the first 20 years is almost by definition relatively less difficult than what we had to do subsequently. Now, just to talk about the political economy, I mean, everyone agrees that much of the changes that we need to reduce the transaction costs of doing business in India, and by that I mean the overall costs of what a businessman has to go through, that a lot of those changes are now required at the level of each individual states. And almost by definition that becomes more difficult. So I think what Dr. N.K. Singh said about the political economy is correct, and that comes about precisely because more and more stakeholders have to be taken on board. And yet we accomplished things that were started in the 90s, including indirect tax reform, right? A nationwide VAT and GST were envisioned by people like Dr. Raja Chalaya and Dr. Manmohan Singh, and that has come to pass. I mean, I think it's a remarkable achievement.
Okay, then let me bring in Dr. Ranganathan. Dr. Ranganathan, has the post-2014 analysis of Dr. Singh's legacy been fair? I mean, was his tenure as Prime Minister judged too unkindly? Let me just put it bluntly.
It depends who judged it. I judged it unkindly, but I would say I was very fair, because from 2004 to 2009, a lot of good things happened under his watch. But from 2009, his second term, I'm afraid he just turned into, pun notwithstanding, Bhishma Pitama, on a bed of arrows, and he just watched things, and everything that we know that could go wrong with governments actually did.
But many people say that some of the talk about scams, etc., and I'm not being an apologist in any which way, but some people say that, look, it was all a notional scams, notional corruption. You know, the pun, since you are into punning, notional being the term that Mr. Sibal introduced at that time with regards to the 2G scandal.
Yes. No, but I mean, scams did take place. Corruption did happen. I mean, yes, you could say the extent of which might have been exaggerated by some, no doubt about it. But it also remains the case that the power was not actually held by him. And I'm not even going into cases where blatantly anti-Hindu bills were being promulgated, about to be, for example, communal violence bill, as you know. He continued a lot of the acts through which Hindus are discriminated. So Waqf Act continued, Place of Worship Act continued, RTE 93rd Amendment was brought in under his watch, that made the obligation only on Hindu-run schools to give reservations. So many things. UCC wasn't brought to the fore. So many things happened that, of course, we are talking about half the or very early nascent age of social media. So the criticism was also cushioned. The media was with him, as we know traditionally. So he led a charmed first term. Second term, as he himself rightly put it, coalition dharma, he was a prisoner to how dirty politics can be. And I certainly hold it against him that he did not stand up. But as I said, I do not expect anything more from Dr. Manmohan Singh. He has delivered enough by being a brilliant academic. and I as a fellow academic would understand his brilliance, and as a terrific finance minister who led us out of the morass. So, I don't want him to be associated with things that, you do 100 things right and all of them are, absolutely great.
Yeah, well, I think viewers, what we've done this evening is really look at the person as a finance minister and then as a prime minister, as a professor, as a mentor, and then also as a student in some ways, and also a legacy from a 360 perspective. So I think we've had a very, very wholesome conversation. And if anyone really wants to get a full sense of Dr. Manmohan Singh, he only needed to have tuned in tonight. Thank you very much for watching. Palki Sharma up with the Vantage next.
Presented by our
Dr. Manmohan Singh was the most unlikely Prime Minister. He was more an accidental one. When Sonia Gandhi refused to take the job in 2004, it was the mild-mannered, soft-spoken economist who was a choice.
I will uphold the sovereignty and integrity of India.
While it did cause much heartburn in the Congress, Sonia Gandhi was convinced that Dr. Singh was the right man for the job. Dr. Manmohan Singh had been the governor of the RBI, deputy chairman of the Planning Commission, secretary in the Finance